Hello, hi. So I'm back for day 22 of VEDA, and yesterday's video was about H.P. Lovecraft, and it was just a loose conversation about him. I didn't do like a whole, I didn't do a lecture or a presentation. Just wanted to talk about him, his legacy, and it's just going to continue to come up throughout the course of watching of Lovecraft Country, which is the HBO show that I also want to talk about. And so I want to talk really quickly-ish about the first episode. My recaps aren't gonna be. I know some people are doing like a scene by scene, thing. I want to talk more so about just the themes of the series and what's happening, just kind of from the perspective of a horror fan watching a horror horror fantasy type of show. So just to get started, the very first episode, and this was I think what they were saying, it was the pilot. And so one thing I want to point out, oftentimes when you're watching the pilot, it kind of feels like a bunch of stuff is thrown in. I've noticed that with other pilots, and then as you continue to watch the season, things kind of space out a little bit more and get a little bit more room to breathe. So I always expect that that'll happen, because for this one, this is the one where you have to kind of sell the story to everyone, to the people who might be investing, to the people who are watching. It's like you have to hook them, and you can't always hook with nuance and spaced out storytelling. Like you got to kind of pack it in. And so in the first episode, it starts off with the main character, who is Atticus Freeman, played by Jonathan Majors, who has a lovely face, so it'll be nice watching his face this season. But somebody wrote that, and I was like, he does have a lovely face. It's helpful. And so we meet him, he and another black woman and other white people are on a bus coming up from the south, headed toward Chicago. And so in that opening scene, he's like on the bus and they're reading, and they're crossing the line from, I guess, what denotes the South, Jim Crow South, from the North. And it's very interesting and telling how, even though, so the bus breaks down and they have to get off, they have to get another mode of transportation. And even though now they're supposed to be technically out of the Jim Crow South, both Atticus and the other black woman on the bus now have to walk to the next town in order, I guess, to pick up the next bus. They don't get to get on the supplemental transportation that is sent by the bus for the people who were on it when it broke down. So that, I think, sets a good tone for how, while this is definitely not set in the Jim Crow South, it does not mean that the characters are not going to experience the segregation, the racism, the mistreatment of black people that they experience. There is often a misconception by people that racism and all of that was kind of most rampant and most aggressive in the South, and people still to this day kind of think that, like, you're in the South and that means that it's just going to be, everything's going to be steeped in racism. It's going to be all about black people, but non-white people being mistreated, and that's not true. Racism and Jim Crow did not stop at the Mason-Dixon line, which is like the definitely on the East Coast, kind of the unofficial, I guess, changing from south to north. It did not. As someone who was born in Chicago and who has the bulk of my family is spread out between Chicago, largely concentrated in Chicago, my immediate family, but also just kind of other places in the Midwest, Indiana, Michigan. I've heard stories how there are places, how they talk about sundown towns, when you are in a major metropolitan area, sometimes there are sundown neighborhoods, and my mom has mentioned stories. It was like, yeah, if you're black, you don't go over there really at all, but definitely not at night or after dark or after a certain, time, because you might not come back home. And she grew up in Chicago. She grew up in a major metropolitan, large industrial city, not, small town America. And so there's just this misconception that I appreciate that the show is already kind of eschewing by showing that racism and segregation and the mistreatment of black people, there was no, you cross a certain line in the country and now you are treated better. That wasn't true at all. So I appreciated that kind of beginning the story. And then, so we get there and we meet Atticus Freeman, who is played by Jonathan Majors, and then we meet his uncle George and his aunt. I need to look up her name. I'll get better at remembering who the people are and their names. I'm not great at remembering names, which I'm sure contributed to why I didn't become like a literary scholar when I was in school, because that just was not something that kind of stuck with me. But his aunt is Hippolyta Freeman, Hippolyta, and she's played by Wanjanae Ellis, who I love her as an actress, and whenever I see her in things, it's like, ooh, I know it's gonna be good. So between her and Courtney B. Vance, it's like, yeah, the couple, and it's a romantic scene. This is a couple of a certain age, they're not laid up in there with the chiseled bodies, and they obviously work out all the time, like they're regular looking people, but they're still getting their sexy on, and so that's always appreciated when you can see black people just being full people, more than just kind of characters playing a point, but actually people living a life. And so it was really great seeing that and seeing their daughter, who's Diana Freeman is her name, and she's played by Jada Harris, and kind of seeing her in another room being like, ew, gross. But of course, as kids, no one wants to think about their parents having sex. I have said as a belief, and I refuse to have a conversation to the contrary, that my parents are smooth and I was delivered by the stork. Like, I would say that with a straight face as a kid, and so you just don't, that's not something you want to consider. And so she says gross, which is just, it sets the tone that they're just an average family. And then Atticus arrives to their house, and she screams because he startles her, and then she like jumps on him and hugs him, and everybody's really happy to see him, and we find out that that's his aunt and uncle and his cousin. But it's really cool seeing kind of that extended family dynamic. And then there's a block party, and again, as someone who was born in Chicago, I lived there up until I was about 7, but I would go back for, family gatherings a lot more when I was much younger. And, going to my grandmother's house and having a cookout in the backyard where we're playing spades, and, the kids are playing spades, the adults are playing bid whist, and there's music and dancing, and everybody's just having a good time. And, that was, I felt that and saw that in the block party, which is really cool. It's like the neighborhood just comes alive, and everyone is just there to have a great time. And it's just really, comfortable enclave of blackness in this city, which for me, was like a nice little glimpse of home. But this is 1950s America. So it was really interesting because that's like essentially my parents, and so watching that was really cool. And then and then the story moves, and we find out that Atticus is looking for Atticus. His father is missing. He's been missing for like 2 weeks, and he is coming back because he wants to go find him. And initially, it seems like he was decided he was going to strike out on his own, but of course, his uncle George is like, no, you're not. And then through the course of the block party, we meet Letitia Lewis, Letty, who's played by Journey Smollett. And we also meet her fantastic sister, Ruby Baptiste, who is played by Wumi Masaku. I'm going to look that up to make sure I'm saying that properly. But she was fantastic. We meet just other kind of a general cast of characters. But those are kind of the main people that we meet. They have like conversations, and we establish relationships with them. And so as Atticus is like, well, I'm leaving, I'm gonna go find my dad, and he goes to his dad's place and he stays there, and you can tell like him and his dad obviously have a complicated relationship, but that doesn't mean that he wants his dad to be missing. So we are immediately kind of dropped into this very interesting and complex family dynamic, with Atticus and his dad, but then also Letitia with her sister Ruby, and Letitia. And so now we're dealing with, we're kind of directly addressing colorism in the Black community specifically, because Letitia is really light skinned and Ruby is darker skinned, a heavier woman, but they're both beautiful women. Like they're both, but we know as black people, we're very clear, what that means when you have the thin, light-skinned, pretty sister, and then you are the dark-skinned, heavier sister who's also pretty, but you are not going to get the same level of physical kind of appreciation as she would. And so you could kind of tell that, Ruby has done the appropriate thing and has a job and is doing this and has a place, and then Letitia, or Letty as she's called, is kind of floating about the world, and she definitely seems like she has kind of a free spirit type of energy. And so we get that dynamic, we get Atticus and his father, and then but in that we also get a really nice, calm, kind of normal family dynamic with George and Hippolyta. Hippolyta, I'm gonna look that up. With them and their daughter Diana. So we get a good juxtaposition of what Black family life could look like. Like we have the complicated, because oftentimes on shows, if the Black person gets a family, the family they get, it's complicated, it's negative, or it's we don't often get to see, or we get to see like this cookie cutter, very happy, very normal family, and it's like we don't often get to see them together in one show. And so in this instance, we immediately get a very mixed, diverse family dynamic, which I think is pretty cool. And so we get all of that fantastic Blackness and family and storytelling and setting of the scene before we even get into the horror, which I love, because oftentimes in horror movies, just in general, they're typically not very nuanced characters. I think it's because the horror genre in and of itself is kind of a character. Like horror is a thing that has to be woven throughout a story, and so sometimes it's not easy for directors and writers and things to strike a balance where you have the horror, but then you also have the people. And also, it really just depends on the type of horror. Some horror, they're really, you don't want a nuanced character. You want characters to kind of play archetypes, so then they can play out in this. And because what's more interesting is that what they're experiencing and the horror that they're going through and kind of how they come out of it. And so in this instance, we're definitely getting something that has kind of thriller elements, because with thrillers sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you might often find more of a dramatic part of it before the thriller part kind of picks up. So with this one, that's kind of what we're getting, which I think is cool. But I know this is called Lovecraft Country, and so I also know that anything where you have Lovecrafts involved, there's going to be critters. So I know that critters are coming. So critters are always coming in this. When you're talking about Lovecraft, because his Cthulhu mythos is all about kind of creatures, and they're often like ubiquitous, weird, kind of multi layered, like many arms, many eyes, many mouths type of creatures that kind of are all powerful and kind of really hard to defeat. So I know that that's coming, but before we get to that, which I like, we're also getting a really good background story, which lets me know that we're going to actually learn about these people as people and not as archetypes, which as a horror fan, that's really cool, because now it's going to be very nuanced. So we've set the stage, we've gotten these characters, we kind of know who, what some of the things that they are definitely wrestling with currently. But the big thing is that now we're going to go on what sounds to me like is the start of a hero's journey, but it's not a singular hero. It's three people who are going to have their own journey, are going to have their own journey over the course of the series, but they're doing it together. But everyone has kind of their own cross to bear, essentially, or their own experience to go through over the course of this. So what I mean by that, Atticus is looking for his father, but he is also, he knows his father has gone looking for his mother. And it's kind of at the very beginning of the episode, Atticus is he's a veteran, so I think Army. He's a veteran, and so he's in war. So you see like this wartime scene, and it starts off like any kind of typical war scene where people are fighting, they're running, they're in trenches, there's gunfire, they're kind of like an active war scene. And then he like kind of crawls out from the trenches, and then you see this war scene, but then you see aliens. And it's like, okay, now, yes. And so you see aliens, an alien ship kind of beams, it's a female creature, because I don't know that she's human, she's humanoid. I think that's the point, like she looks human, but not. And so she comes down, she embraces him, and then she says something that is in a language that we don't know, but he seems to resonate or connect with her, and whatever's happening, they have like a very interesting moment in the midst of all of this chaos. And so we see that has happened, so we definitely know that there's something special about Atticus. And so he is going to go through that journey while also kind of reconciling, having the reckoning about his father, but also kind of trying to understand what's going on, with his mother and what that even means. We have Letty, who is, she seems to be treated kind of like the sprite of the family. Like she's the one who is out there kind of flitting about, no real responsibility, nothing really tying her down. Her mother passed away. I don't know how recently. I don't think I picked up. They could have said it, but I don't know if I picked up on like when it happened, but it's recent enough, and she didn't go to the funeral. We don't know why, per se. She doesn't specifically say like, well, I didn't go because of this. She just says like, you guys keep like harping on the fact that I didn't go. So she could have not been, she could have been indisposed for any of various reasons, or she could have just wanted to go for whatever reason, but she missed her mother's funeral. And so you can tell with her sister, and then later we meet her brother when they're on the road, and like they have this knockdown drag out fight about it. And she like, I think she was thinking she was going to stay with him, and he's just like, nah, to go. And so you can tell that there's a very complicated family dynamic there. There's something that she is trying to find about herself. And so we are going to go on the journey with her. George Freeman, Atticus's uncle, he is the creator of a Green Book type of publication, guidebook for the Negro to travel safely through the South. And so he's going on this journey. And he's kind of the elder statesman of the crew. He got bad knees, so it's like when stuff gets real, his physical kind of issues or challenges definitely come into play, but he's a resilient guy, so he definitely manages to handle himself accordingly. But he is also going on his own journey and kind of figuring out who he is and what that means. And so you have these three characters that are embarking on a journey together, but they each have their own experiences and their own kind of things they have to learn over the course of the time, which I think is really cool to kind of position that in just as part of the story. And so of course, they get on the road, and it's a really kind of, it's a road trip. They're listening to music, they're talking, they're laughing, and then they get to the South, and and that's actually when the horror begins. And so I also find that very interesting and telling. I'm sorry, they're not in the South. They're going to, darn it, where are they going? I cannot remember. I'll have to reference it because they don't, that's right, I'm saying the South, they don't go to the South. They're going to, what city? I'm going to look for that and then mention it, but they're kind of going cross country. So once they leave Chicago and they get into, okay, let's say small town America, because it's not the South, it's small town America, that's when the horror begins. And it's kind of the horror that I've always been drawn to, and the horror that I tend to like to write, is like the horror of the human condition. So the horror that is levied by people, which in this case, that horror is rooted in racism and how they're treated very aggressively by the white people that they encounter. So it's like they have these small situations where, you know, Atticus and Letty are kind of outside of, they stop at a gas station. Atticus and Letty are standing outside of the car, of course, you know, stretching their legs. Atticus is eating a banana for a snack because who, you know, that's a nice snack for on a road trip. And this white guy like mocks him. And so they have to get in the car because Atticus is like pissed off about it and is kind of reacting to it. But they have to leave because if Atticus reacts to it the way, you know, a lot of people would expect a human to react to someone mocking you, they could be killed. Like not just put in jail, not just mistreated, they could be killed. And so it is life or death, which is what adds to the horror. And then so they have several race incidences. One of them, they go into a George has gotten a tip about a place that is friendly to Negroes. I don't think it's run by a black person, but it's a white woman who would serve Negroes, black people, at the time. And so they go to check it out because that's what he does for his guidebook. He goes and finds these tips and he checks out whether these places are valid and he puts them in the book. And so he's going to check it out because that's another task that they're accomplishing. And they get in there and they immediately, you know, the energy is off. And of course, you know, when you're on the road, you gotta go to the bathroom. So Letty is like, let me go to the bathroom. So she walks to the bathroom and she hears there's like a guy at the he works there. He's like a worker at the counter, and a patron. The patron leaves, so like he leaves, and the guy who's at the counter goes in the back and he calls, I guess, the owner of the establishment, and it's just like, or he calls someone, I don't know if he calls someone, it's like, I know what you guys did to Lydia. And so Lydia was the person who was supposed to be open to, you know, serving black people in this establishment. I know what you guys did to Lydia. I didn't serve them. They just came in and sat down. And so Letty overhears this, and you know, this is the cue to exit. But in the same time, you have George and Atticus who are sitting out front at a booth, and they make a reference to why the White House is white. So I thought it was a cool historic reference. And so Atticus says, so tell me again why the White House is painted white. And so George is like, it's painted white because when it burned down, the slaves put the white, when the slaves rebuilt the White House, that they used white to hide the burn marks. And so he says that, and then he like scoots one of the tiles to the side, and you can see that the place had been fairly recently burned down and then like built back up. And at this time that they make this realization, Letty comes out of the back and is like, we gotta get the fuck out, which I thought was awesome. Just kind of the realness and the rawness of her saying that, because as a woman at that time, you know, that wasn't deemed ladylike. So I thought that was fantastic because it's real. Like, it's not I'm trying to say this in a demure and low-key way. Like, we need to be loud and aggressive because we have got to go, because it is life or death. And again, the horror. So they leave, they're chased by these people, and it's almost comedic. It's one of those things, it's like, it would be funny if it weren't real, if it weren't true. So it's almost like you're watching this action scene where they're like running from these guys in a truck that is shooting at them. Like, this is life or death. But they're, you know, they're trying to kill them. So they escape that narrowly. And then they find themselves, then of course, you know, they make it to Letty's brother's house. They stay there, they eat, they kind of sit, and then they strike out. After Letty has this big argument with her brother about just their family issues, they have a really big, loud argument. And then, you know, the next day she comes out, she joins them, because I presume that she was thinking she would stay there with him and kind of get her bearings. And he's like, nope, you gotta go. So she's back on the road with them. And this is when the horror kind of ratchets up even further, the horror of the human condition part, because they find themselves, they're trying to find this place on the map that is supposed to be where Atticus' father the place that he was researching before he went missing. So they're like, he's got to be here, but it's going to be one of those places that is on the map, is not denoted on the map, but it's at that location. So they're kind of circling this area, and this white sheriff pulls them over, and is like, hey, you guys are in a sundown town. You have to be out of here before dusk, or we're going to kill you. Period. And so they're like, all right, so he harasses them, and ultimately he lets them leave, but it's like a few minutes to dusk. He follows them, so they pull out, and he immediately follows them, and the speed limit is 25. So it's like, we have to get to the other town where it's not a sundown town, as far as we know, that what he's saying, that'll be our safety, so that we're not killed. But I can only do 25 miles an hour, and we have like minutes to dusk. So there's a whole stressful scene, like, we can't get out, and you can't speed, because if you speed, then he's gonna pull you over. But also, if you're there after dusk, then he's gonna pull you over and kill you and attack you. So they actually make it, but as soon as they hit a bend, there's a bunch of police officers. So of course they take them and are going to kill them. They take them into the woods to kill them, all three of them. And that's when the creatures come. So before we even get to the creatures, we have all of this horror of the human condition, what I like to call it, and these people who are horrible, who are making the fear and bringing the horror. And that's very real. That I'm going to call that historical horror, because that's real and true and accurate, and that is how it was and is in some parts of the country still to this day. But they take them to the woods, and that's when creatures come. And so there's these big, huge, like, they look like manatees, but with like a bunch of eyes. I forgot what they're called. Yeah, my details. I'll get better. But they're these creatures that just come in and chew and bite and eat. And so they descend, and since the police officers have Letty, Atticus, and George on the ground with guns pointed at their heads because they're about to shoot them, the creatures, of course, attack the people who are standing and are easier to get to, which are the police officers. So several people are bitten in half, and everyone runs. They get to a house. One of the guys is bitten and then turns into one of the creatures. So they're kind of like vampire-esque creatures. But he becomes the creature that so then in being a horrible person, he then becomes the creature, which increases the horror. And so ultimately they're able to make it out of that alive, due in part to Letty, because the sheriff decides, she's like, I have to run. They figured out that the creatures are afraid of the dark. So she's like, I have to run to the car we have lanterns and flashlights in the car. And so, of course, Atticus is like, I can do it. I'll go. He's been in war. He's from the military. He's in fantastic shape. So he's like, I got it. I can do this. And the guy's like, no, I'm going to tell the weaker person, which is the woman, she needs to go, because essentially he wants to sacrifice her to the creatures. And so Letty was like, Atticus was like, can you do this? She was like, Letty was like, I was tracked. I got this. And so I've been hearing people kind of talk about how this is casting Letty as kind of the black woman saves the world. And I get that point of view, but I think also this is, in the horror trope, the woman is always the weaker, always, which is why there's this whole final girl theme that is often very championed to a point, because having a woman survive and then ultimately best the big baddie at the very end is something that doesn't always happen. Because but when it does, it's like it feels kind of empowering. So I think in this instance, they tried to sacrifice her. She persevered and was able to come back, circle around, and save the day. So I think that was actually pretty cool. So of course she gets out there, she runs full steam ahead. She makes it to the cars just in time. She is able to drive the car to kind of shine the light into the house where they are, and then they're able to get out. Not unscathed. They are definitely beat up, but they're able to get out. And so the first episode, I think, had a nice kind of build up, had a nice kind of big scene, and then the denouement was pretty quick. Like it was just like, and they made it out, and now they're walking, and they found, and in the end, after all of that, they found the bridge to the area that they were looking for, the town that was like in an area on the map but not denoted. They found the bridge that they were looking for, and you see them crossing the bridge. You know, they're limping, they are beaten, bedraggled, bloodied, like all of that, but they made it. And so that's how we end episode 1, which I thought was really cool way to introduce the series, the themes, and everything else. So I'm very excited to see what happens with episode 2, and I will be back to talk about episode 2 a lot closer to when episode 2 comes out. It took me a minute to decide to kind of talk about this series, but here I am talking about it, and I really enjoyed it. And so I would love to have a conversation in the comments as well. If you are watching Lovecraft Country, I would love to hear your thoughts about the themes and how everything played out, and you know, the first episode. I'm not a person who has, you know, a free screener. I don't have screeners to this. I mean, I would like screeners, but I don't have them. I don't have that audience. That's not necessarily my brand. But I'll be watching them each week. So it comes on Sunday nights on HBO at 9. I'll be watching. I will be making a video to talk about it afterwards. And so join me for the conversation about Lovecraft Country. I loved the first episode, thought it was really good, thought it was a great way to set the tone, and I'm very excited. They showed a promo of, you know, how they show like the season review, and it was like, I can't tell what's gonna happen because there was so much, but it all looked fantastic. So I'm very excited to see where it goes, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about the first episode. Where do you think it's gonna go? How do you think this is all gonna develop? And what is gonna happen to our 3 characters on what I'm calling a hero's journey? I'm not sure yet if that's what it is, but that's kind of where I'm calling it to start. And I love when a woman goes on a hero's journey, because that often is never called that. So I really think that's fantastic. So that's my VEDA Day 22, but also my first episode about Lovecraft Country. Again, in the comments, what do you think? What did you think? Did you like it? Did you watch it? Will you watch it? Join me. Let's talk about it. And this was really fun and cool. I look forward to the next time that we can talk again. Bye.